evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Annie, and a very welcome to Croí's special World Heart Day episode of our Living Well series. A very warm welcome to our live audience, the first in 3 years, so welcome everyone and thank you for coming. Welcome also to those of you who are joining us via live stream this evening. So today is World Heart Day, the 29th of September. And at the end of World Heart Month, Croí is a very proud member of the World Heart Federation. Every year we participate in their global campaign to shine a very bright light on cardiovascular health and to raise awareness about the different ways in which we can be proactive in keeping our hearts, our families, and our communities healthy. We also want to spread the message of positivity and hope, because it's never too late to start making lifestyle changes. And even if you have experienced a diagnosis or an event, it's still never too late to start making changes. You can live well with cardiovascular disease by making smart lifestyle choices, and that is what we are here to discuss this evening. The theme we have adopted this year is Use Heart for You. Self-care is heart care. To quote Aisling, our dietitian, self-care is not all bubble baths and candles. It's about knowing and understanding your numbers and taking control and taking action. And the title of our talk this evening, Self-Care is Heart Care, the Power of Knowing Your Numbers and Taking Action. As I said, for the first time in 3 years, we are back in our fabulous building, meeting the public and doing what we do best. Earlier today, as part of Heartfest, we hosted the community to attend for heart health checks, taster sessions on some of the community activity some of the activities that we do here, exercise, mindfulness, yoga, and much, much more. This year, we also celebrate 10 years of Croí House, and what an impact this one-of-a-kind heart and stroke centre has had on the work that we do as an organisation. The building recently received major international recognition as being the first Irish organisation to be accredited by the European Association of Preventive Cardiology for its work in cardiovascular risk management and prevention. Croí is only one of 11 organisations across Europe to be awarded status for this here in Galway, and we are extremely proud of that. I would also like to say a very special thank you this evening to our supporters of this event, Benecol, who have generously supported us in delivering this evening's event, and also Heartfest 22 throughout the day today. So, we are delighted to welcome a wonderful panel of speakers this evening. And as I've already said, this month, to mark World Heart Day, we are focusing on the idea that when we take care of our health and well-being, we are automatically taking care of our hearts. Self-care is heart care. Throughout the session, we will talk about the importance of understanding risk factors, things like high cholesterol that can increase your risk for heart disease and stroke, the power of knowing your numbers, as we have said, taking action and controlling these numbers. This evening, I'm delighted to welcome Frankie Lane in his lovely red hat in honour of World Heart Day, who is a patient advocate. He has survived a traumatic event, and he is also a musician. And he is going to play a little song for us in just one moment. We have Dr. Lisa Hynes, who is a health psychologist and our head of health programs here at Croí. And we're delighted to welcome Dr. Susan Connolly, consultant cardiologist, just arrived here in Galway and taking care of the community heart hubs. The community hubs, sorry, but Susan will explain that in a few moments. So we're going to start with Frankie and a little tune in honour of World Heart Day and our first event back in Croí House. Take it away, Frankie.
Thank you. Coffee black, knicker red, start this day like all the rest. The first thing in the morning that I do is start missing you. Some broken hearts never mend, some memories never end, some tears will never So, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, it's true what they say in the song, some broken hearts never mend. But the good news is that up to 80% of them could have been avoided in the first place from breaking. And we're going to talk about a lot of that too later on, I presume.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frankie. And I feel like we should maybe just take the evening and do some music. I could certainly listen to you play. You were doing the warm-up earlier and it was absolutely gorgeous. So thank you for that and for warming us up. So Frankie, when you get settled there, we're going to start with you.
Right.
And we're going to ask you to tell us your story and your most recent experience.
Yeah, it's always hard bringing these stories back to life again. I was trying it on the way down in the car this morning, and I got halfway through it, and I was saying, okay, I'm going to keep that for later. About 6 years ago, I was doing a gig type session down in a very famous place in County Cork, Croí House, and I'd had a good night, but I felt that I was kind of getting the flu or getting a cold or something like that. And each song that I was singing, I could feel my voice wasn't hitting it the way it would normally hit the notes, etc. You know, and that was just something that I went about with anyway, and had a good night and went to bed. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, go to the toilet, and I felt really sick, like in a way that I'd never felt before. It wasn't so much a vomiting sickness or anything like that. I just felt, the only word I can think for it was totally arrested. I felt my 2 arms were kind of almost locked, this feeling in my chest going up to my neck, up to either side of my ears, and just to kind of, I couldn't get comfortable in any position. I got out, I tried to kneel down beside the bed, I tried to sit down, I tried to lie down, front ways, back ways, no ways. And then I said to my wife, Anita, who luckily was with me at the time, because I would normally have not had anybody with me on these occasions. She woke up and she says, what's wrong with you, you know? And I kind of groaned, and because I couldn't really speak, I was so energyless. And I said, I don't know. And she rolled over in bed and said, well, wake me when you do. All these things always have a funny side to them. So anyway, about 2 minutes later, she perked up and says, no, seriously, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? I said, I really don't know. I've never felt like this before, you know. I said, maybe I'd had shellfish in the restaurant, which I wouldn't normally have. And it was a shellfish that I'd never tasted before, and I thought I was having a reaction to it, because I've heard of people with similar symptoms with reactions to shellfish. As Pat Short would say, it was the heckin' fish, you know. But it wasn't. It wasn't the 16 pints anyway.
We'll talk about that later.
No, seriously though, I did actually think it was the shellfish. And then I went outside, sat down, tried to get the air into my lungs, and that was making no difference. Came back in, I tried to sit down again, and it just felt dreadful. And Anita, my wife, said, look, I better ring 999. I said, oh God, don't, for God's sake, don't. I said, and it's a typical thing of when you're going through a condition like this, you're afraid to put people out of joint, that maybe, like, you know, if it was fish, if it was maybe that it had too many pints or one drink too many or something like that. And I would have been mortified if I had brought out an ambulance on a false call, so to speak. But she rang because she said, look, we have to do something, you know, because it was getting bad. So she rang anyway, and I could detect this silence on the phone, and I heard the operator saying, keep him there, keep him awake. And then it was just a bit of muttering. It was handled really well on the 999 lines. And then a first responder came in and saw me, and he nearly had a nervous breakdown because he knew what was happening. And he actually started panicking. And then the, what do you call them? Paramedics came in, 2 paramedics came in and attached me up to the machines. And what was really remarkable for me was, with all the machinery and paraphernalia that was going on around me, that the first thing that was given to me was a little tablet of aspirin. And I felt like saying, God, it's not a cold I have, you know. I feel like, he says, no, it's all right, just put this aspirin on, you'll be grand. And so then they got the ticker tape information off the machine, and they said, we have to take you into hospital for observation. And I said, oh gosh, no, I can't do that. I really have to get home. You know, I've got my son waiting for me at home. They said, no, we really do, actually, just for, you know, it's just for to be on the safe side. And I said, okay. And they said, would you mind getting up on the stretcher there? And I got up on the stretcher, and bang, that was it. I was gone. Now, at this point, if this was a Netflix series, you'd rewind about 3 months and say, how did I get to this situation? How did I arrive here? Well, like these things, it was probably a very complicated, multifaceted story that led me to getting there, but I was here anyway, and it had to be dealt with. I wasn't aware of anything because I was, I suppose, I don't know, dead, basically. So my wife was dealing with the paramedics. She went into a panic, naturally enough, and she was told to stay quiet and leave the room. And then they put the defib on me and tried to kickstart me. That didn't work. And then they left it for a while and did it again. And that didn't work. And then my wife was in the sidelines at this stage, and they turned to her and said, look, here's the situation. We'll try one more time. If he's not coming back, I'm afraid we have to leave him here with you. And she was in pieces, of course, from this, and she screamed her head off. And the suddenness of that shock is never to be underestimated. We had a 9-year-old son at the time, and sorry.
Are you okay, Frankie? Yeah, take a moment there.
So, yeah, the ambulance man said basically, this is it. If it doesn't respond, Anita came over apparently and cried into my ear and said, we need you back. We need you. David needs you back. You've got a son, daughter, wife that loves you. Need back, apparently. And bang. So, next part of the series, bang, I wake up in the ambulance, and I said to the man at the end of the ambulance, I said, did I pass out? It was a bit like Father Duke and Father Ted. Did I pass out, Ted? And he says, you fainted, yeah. Okay, I said, and I really still felt terrible, and I was making a weird groaning noise, going like this all the time, and I still couldn't move, and they couldn't get a line into me, which was a very serious situation, apparently, because my veins were collapsing by the minute. suppose, but I had come back to life again. I suppose it's important to say at this stage that for 30 years or so I believed in fitness was always going to save my life no matter what I did in life. I was a competitive cyclist. I'd raced in most of the big major races in Ireland as a top amateur. I was a smoker and a drinker, however. But I always believed that the cycling would counteract that, would neutralise the bad effects just somewhat anyway. And I suppose they did. And maybe that was the thing that brought me back to life in the end, was that just little bit of extra stamina that you needed to snap back into life. Who knows? It could have been Anita whispering in my ear. I don't know. I don't remember any of it. That's, I suppose, something for you to make up your mind about. But I was in the ambulance. I was trembling. I was rigid. And at no moment did I feel that I was having a heart attack, actually, because I thought it would be the last thing I'd have ever. Turned out to be the last thing I had, all right, in any sort of a way. They had to pick up a separate team of paramedics who could get a line into me because I was apparently fading fast, and they had a team ready in Cork University Hospital. So they pulled into a petrol station, another team of medics hopped on board, and I don't really remember what they did, but I got into the hospital and I was laid out, and it was some sort of screening machine put over me. I was awake during the procedure. I remember looking to the right and seeing this man in a green Viz jacket looking at me all the time, looking. He never took his eyes off me, and he was the man that gave me CPR. And he was kind of like the green angel standing over to the right. After a bit of wrestling, Dr. Carney got a stent in and things began to ease off. I was brought into intensive care for a few days, what seemed like just an overnight, but it was actually a week. My wife was shattered by all this, and she had to stay in a hostel. How she put up with it, I don't know. But the one thing that I remember when I came to and had any sense in my head was the feeling that we waste so much life on unnecessary worry. That was the one big, powerful feeling that overwhelmed me. Perhaps before that, or when I came more to my senses, should I say, the thing that really overpowered me was the vision of my son and my wife and daughter standing at my graveside crying into the grave, and the little boy saying, "Daddy, Daddy, come back, I need you." I've seen that myself since, and I've seen it in situations that it didn't need to be, because the information is out there. We need to go look for it.
So that's exactly what we're going to address this evening, Frankie, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd like to say thank you to Anita, who's here as well, because I know that was your journey too, both of you together, the trauma of it. So we really do appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. So, Susan, I think we'll come to you. I suppose Frankie's story is not in your world, it's not unusual. Maybe it's one of the more traumatic ones, I don't know. Do you have any comment to make on that? And we'll come to the numbers and everything in a moment, but is there anything you'd like to say?
I suppose as a cardiologist, I've witnessed so many cardiac arrests and resuscitated so many patients. and often you're quite removed from it as a doctor because it's happened loads of times. But actually to hear your story tonight, Frankie, it's a good reminder that behind all these events there's a person, and there's a family, and there's a wife, and there's trauma. And, you know, thank you for telling it the way you did. It's a good reminder to us as doctors.
Thank you. Could I add a little bit to it as well? There's always things you forget, but the man in the green jacket came back to me a week later to visit, and he was the man that gave me CPR, and I gave him a big hug. I was overwhelmed with emotion, because that happens to you when you've gone to such a desperate state. And he said to me, I just wanted to see that you were well. He says, I can't believe it. He says, you're well, I can't believe it. He says, I've had 8 patients since I've seen you, and that's only a week ago, and they're all dead.
Oh my goodness. And was he a paramedic or was he a first responder?
Paramedic, yeah.
Paramedic, okay. And with the first person that came to you, was that a first responder? Was it somebody who had, a lay person who had trained in CPR?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a timely reminder on World Heart Day of the importance of CPR and CPR training, and having those people in the community who can act fast while help is on the way. And one other thing before we move on, and I know it's something that our health teams speak about here all the time. You mentioned, you know, not wanting to bother the ambulance or the doctor or whatever. They will tell you here, doesn't matter if it's a mistake or if it's a false alert or whatever. That's neither here nor there. The message is call 999 if you think you're having an event or somebody in your vicinity is having an event. So anyway, we'll just move on from that bit, I guess, Susan. And in terms of Frankie, and he mentioned, you know, that he lived an active life and everything beforehand. So let's roll it back just a little bit before an event and what, you know, the importance we're talking here about knowing your numbers. You know, give us maybe a whistle-stop tour of, you know, what are these numbers? What are the important things, the headline things we need to be aware of?
Okay, so I think the thing about heart attacks and heart disease in general, it tends to be quite unpredictable. And I've had so many patients say to me in coronary care, but I felt fine before all this. And that's what happens with a heart attack. You feel fine until it happens. And that's because the plaque in your arteries, it's lying there dormant, a bit like a creme brulee. You ever eaten a creme brulee?
Never again. Never again.
The occasional treat. And it's lying there in the wall of your artery, and it's not blocking anything. But then for some reason, the top of that creme brulee cracks, and the blood flowing past hits the gooey part, the lovely part of the creme brulee. And what happens is your body wants to heal that crack, so a clot forms. And the clot builds very, very quickly, and that's what blocks the artery. And that's when the symptoms start. But that's why the vast majority of patients do not have any warning. You will get some patients who come in and go, oh, for the last week, when I was walking up a hill or walking down to the shop, I had to stop, I had a pain in my chest. But usually heart attacks come out of the blue. Who gets them? Well, I mean, the classic is it's more likely in men as you get older, but it's multifactorial. There's not one single thing that causes them. The risk factors are smoking, and I used to smoke when I was a junior doctor. I was like a chimney. We all were, because we were working all hours. But even 1 or 2 cigarettes a day will increase your risk. So it's better off not to be smoking at all. High blood pressure, and this is where your numbers are important, because a lot of high blood pressure is not diagnosed. It's a silent disease. People don't know they have it, and the only way you can find out is to check it. The only way to get it checked is to go in to see your doctor or nurse, or you can check it yourself. And this is something I spoke about on the radio yesterday. I think we're moving a lot more towards monitors at home, and COVID has done that. Because people didn't want to go to their doctor or the nurse. And you can get these monitors in pharmacies. They're not expensive, although I am aware of we're all watching our pennies at the moment. But they're validated and they're accurate. and you can take your blood pressure at home. The ideal blood pressure is about 120/70. High blood pressure is if it's greater than 140/90 in clinic or 135/85 at home, because you're more relaxed at home. What strikes me when I talk to patients, I always say to them, what's your blood pressure been like in the past? And they always say to me, my GP said it was fine. And I'm like, well, what's fine? What was the number? No idea.
Idea. Yeah.
And if you don't know what it is, then you have no control over it. So my simple advice to patients, if you ever have a check done, always ask the person doing it, what are the numbers? You've got the top number and the lower number. And then you've got cholesterol in your blood, which is the fatty part in your blood. And you've got various parts of the cholesterol. The average in Ireland is 5. Very high would be 7 or 8. And you've got your bad cholesterol and your good cholesterol. So just knowing the whole number is not enough. You need to know the breakdown. Women tend to have higher good cholesterols. So even if their total cholesterol is very high, that's often not a bad thing. Smoking, diabetes. Again, another undiagnosed disease, very common. And that needs a blood sugar to diagnose it, or what we call a HbA1c. You don't need to be fasting anymore. And if you have a family history or if you have risk factors being obese, you should have a HbA1c. And then family history is important. And you can't fight your genes, unfortunately. Now, if your father died at 95 from a heart attack, that's neither here nor there. It's when it's in your relatives at a younger age. So if your father or brother before 55, or your mother or sister before 65, then there's a genetic link, and you yourself are at increased risk. And I see a lot of patients coming to me because their brother or father dropped dead. And often the men come to me when they're at the same age their father was when he dropped dead. And they've got children just like Frankie did, and they're scared. And they've wanted to come to me for ages, but they haven't been able to work up and then usually the wife is like your wife was, Frankie. I mean, I don't know where men would be without women, do you know? You need us to organise you. You wouldn't be here. It's the women who make them come and get checked out. But I don't want to make out this as a male disease. No, it's not. It kills women as well. Yeah. More men than women, but it's the biggest killer of women. So same risk factors as well. Women are protected up to the menopause because there's something in our female hormones that protects us. But once you pass the menopause, your risk becomes the same as a man's. So it's something to be conscious of. Doesn't mean HRT reduces your risk. It's not as easy as that. So how can you prevent it, I think, is
exactly.
the key thing.
What can we do to prevent it? Yeah,
so there's two types of prevention. You can prevent it ever happening in the first place, and that's what we call primary prevention. And that's knowing your numbers and taking action, leading a healthy lifestyle. And you don't have to be perfect. None of us are perfect, but just doing your best, small changes, trying to do what's manageable. And then you can decide to take medication to reduce your risk. And medication would be mainly statins. You've all heard of statins. Normally when I mention statins to a patient, they look at me like I've mentioned cyanide.
Yeah.
Ooh, but they, wreck your muscles, cause liver problems and all that. And what's causing that is the internet and the newspapers. And it's all nonsense. So I always say I started in cardiology in 1995 as an intern, and the first statin trial had come out. And then what I see now is completely different what I saw 25 years ago, because statins have transformed management of heart disease. Because that creme brulee in the artery, all soft and gooey, statins make it hard because they take the cholesterol out of it, they leach it out. So you don't get rid of the plaque, but that's okay, you don't need to. But it stops it causing trouble. So they are the wonder drugs, and they're incredibly safe. Yeah. So and they'd be the main messages.
The main messages. And in terms of, making those changes, let's say you start today, or you start early, you get in there before, you know, kind of any major disease takes hold or anything like that, or even if something has started and you begin to make changes, are the percentages good in terms of somebody starting, no matter where you are, almost
Absolutely.
on that trajectory?
Absolutely. And when I used to see heart attacks when I was training, it was at that time still a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the prognosis wasn't good, but now we have incredible medication, incredible, and we know so much more. So one thing I always do when I meet my heart attack patients in clinic, and I particularly try to see the younger ones because they have that bigger psychological hit. Your 85-year-old who has a heart attack tends to be a bit more stoical because they're like, well, I'm older and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But your 40-year-old is like, oh my God. And I've lost my train of thought.
We were talking.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I always try and give them a sense of optimism. And I'm not lying. There's so much to be optimistic about. And Frankie, you're here. You did the hard thing, which was surviving the arrest. But with the right medication and the right lifestyle, you can live a perfectly normal life, the same prognosis as somebody who hasn't had a heart attack. And that's, for me, the key message I try and give patients. It's so good compared to the way it used to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. We'll come back to you in a moment. So, Lisa, on that, you know, about making changes, managing our numbers, it all comes down to the things we do every day. Why is prevention so damn hard? Why can we just not do it? We know it. Why can't we do it? Yeah.
Yeah, the $1 million question. And yeah, I think you put it really well, Annie, and it's something that we talk about a lot here, getting from knowing to doing. There is so much information out there. We know so much about health. It's coming at us from all sides these days, but it's still maddeningly difficult to get from knowing to doing. We all have the experience of, having all of the information, all the motivation, and still finding it difficult to, start a new routine or make a change in our lifestyle that we know is really important for our health. So knowing by itself isn't enough, and it's a narrative that we probably need to let go of, because we give ourselves a very hard time when knowing isn't in fact enough to get to doing. In the area of cardiovascular disease, it is a really hopeful and important message that there is so much to be optimistic about. We know so much. There are so many treatments, and taking action is so effective. There are so many things we can do differently around, physical activity and diet, taking medications, all of these things, lots of options. But as humans, sometimes that can stop us in our tracks. There's almost too many options. I think a really nice way to understand this is a line I heard from another health psychologist before, that apple pie will always taste better than apples. When it comes to humans, our relationship with health and doing the healthy things isn't simple, it's complicated. So there is a bit of a black box between getting from knowing to doing that doesn't always fit with our kind of assumption that we are rational. We really aren't. There's so much more to it than that. As humans, we are drawn to instant gratification, to familiarity, to routine, to comfort. We push away from discomfort, change, things that are unfamiliar. So again, change is something that we resist. We are wired to avoid. So hopefully that paints a bit of a picture as to why prevention is so hard, why making changes can in fact be so difficult. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this evening, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more as we're going on about what to actually do about that. But just to start by putting that out there, it is very, very much possible to make changes to our lifestyle that we can sustain. But it takes a bit of work, and it's a slightly different lens and view than we often take in our society. And a final thing is just to acknowledge the impact of COVID. I think an awful lot of people, and we're hearing a lot at the moment, that people are really finding it hard to get back into their routines, particularly around physical activity, for example. So if that is you, anyone who's listening this evening, that's okay. You're not alone. And there are things that we can do to make that a bit easier for ourselves.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And just as we're chatting about all of that there, Frankie, when we were chatting ahead of tonight's talk, you spoke about the I don't knows. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Last year, a friend of mine, passed away. He's 10 years younger than me, if not more. When you get older, you tend to forget the years. Forget the numbers, actually. And I stood at the graveside with his wife, and she was naturally devastated. There was no warning, but there was a silent warning. He was taking a lot of Gaviscon. And I said to her, she told me this at the graveside, she said she was taking a lot of Gaviscon, he had this kind of indigestion, and I said, that's funny. I said, I had exactly the same thing. And the night I had cardiac arrest, I had weeks of it, constant indigestion. And that really made me think. I woke up the next morning and I said, what can we do? What can we do about all this? And how can we educate people? How can we educate people like me who didn't know these things? And I felt that the only way to do it was that people would actually say, I didn't know that. By saying, I didn't know that, you immediately equip yourself with knowledge. Just by the fact of saying, I didn't know that indigestion can be a sign of heart disease, don't assume that it's harmless. You've armed yourself with knowledge there without being told. You go and ask the question yourself. I didn't know that. So I got a load of musicians to use the medium of music to get across to people, and they'd start off a song, and then they'd stop in the middle of the song, look into the camera and say, I didn't know that heart disease is a big threat to us all. And then they continue on the song again, and that stopping, and I didn't know that, armed people with knowledge straight away. And now they go over and ask the question. The information is there with Croí, with the Irish Heart Foundation, with the British Heart Foundation. It's all there, but we're not asking the questions. We need to be motivated. We need to find a way of motivating people to go and ask the questions, or nothing is going to change. There'll still be 4,000 people dying a year. Think of it this way. It's like back when I was young, there was something like 2,000 people a year killed on the roads. Nowadays, there's 250, 300 people. It's still terrible. But because action was taken on a national level, I suppose, the numbers fell right down straight away because all these accidents were avoidable. It's the same with heart disease. You've got up to 80%. I couldn't believe that number when I heard it. Gosh, up to 80% can be avoided. That's amazing. Imagine going to a cancer talk and saying, well, it's a high mortality rate in this cancer, but up to 80% can be avoided. I listened to a woman last week talking about the death of her husband through cancer, and it was very moving because she said that in his last weeks, he said, I'd do chemo every week if I could stay alive for another week to see my children. Here we are, people with cardiac conditions, and we're not taking this action that we can actually do. Yeah. It's so easy to take steps of going to your doctor and getting the warning signs into place. Absolutely,
yeah. Thank you, Frankie. And that segues very nicely here to Susan. Just, I suppose, firstly, on that, why is it so difficult, I suppose, to get the message out there about prevention? Maybe people are more aware. It's certainly, there probably is an awareness, but at the same time, what are we actually doing about it?
Yeah, although, if you look back at the 70s in Ireland, there was a lot more heart attacks. So we have made a lot of progress. In many ways, we've improved our diets in terms of saturated fat, but now we're eating more rubbish in terms of refined sugars. So we've replaced one poison for another. But there's less smoking now than there was 30 years ago. When I was in college, we used to all smoke in the lecture room. That's just unheard of now.
On our airplanes.
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
So I think things have improved, but I think where we're going wrong now is our obesogenic environment. You know, with fast food at every corner, our busy lives, not getting time to exercise. It's as Lisa said, it's complex why people don't behave in the perfect way. And I'm not perfect by a long shot.
Yeah, well, neither but like, I mean, in my case, for instance, just talking a little bit about my own case, I have a hereditary cholesterol, you know, and I had given up smoking and put way down on drinking, etc. a good few years before I had the heart attack, you know. So like, and I cycled 40 miles the day before.
Do you have a family history, Frankie?
My grandmother died, and my grandfather died actually as a result of a heart attack, but from a Spanish flu, from, you know.
But your own mother and father?
My mother and father didn't. They got cancer in just very old age, 96. 97.
But, you know, there's been a realisation in Ireland that there's been a huge amount of work done in treating the acute heart attack. And now everybody gets what Frankie got. You go to a cath lab and a cardiologist will open up the blocked artery, and it's a fantastic treatment, and that's what you had done. Amazing treatment.
Absolutely.
But that's only the start of the journey, because the cardiologist will only have put a stent in that one area that was blocked. But you will always find other parts of the artery have the creme brulees. And they're not narrow.
Of course, yeah.
So you can't put stents in them. So you've got to find another way to stop all those mini creme brulees causing trouble again. And we know that lifestyle changes and managing blood pressure and cholesterol and so on will keep those creme brulees quiet. But it's not just as simple as going to your doctor, getting that sorted and doing the lifestyle changes. That needs a program. That is quite a lot for somebody to achieve on their own. So we need to help them. And the HSE have finally, I love
Indeed.
the HSE, but they're finally making a massive investment in prevention and delivering care in the community. So they're switching their focus from the acute. So that service still runs, which is great, but now they're investing in specialist nurses in the community, dietitians, physiotherapists, so we can take patients who haven't had a heart attack and help them change and manage their risk factors, or take patients like Frankie who have had a heart attack and also help them change and manage their risk factors. And that's what my new position is. I am a consultant cardiologist in integrated care, and it's tremendously exciting. So I think the future is getting brighter. The HSE have recognised they need to invest in prevention, and they're doing it. And we're very excited now to be starting this programme in Galway. And I think it'll make a huge difference to people.
So for a person who's in the community, who maybe has a significant number of risk factors, they've not had an event, how do they come onto your radar in this community hub?
Yeah, I think the first thing they need to do is see their own doctor. Because it's not just about your individual numbers. We calculate your risk of a heart attack, and we use an actual calculator. It's online. We input all your numbers and out spits a figure. Now, it's not 100% accurate, but it's fairly accurate. So if you're a 40-year-old woman and you smoke, but everything else is fine, your chance of a heart attack are tiny in the next 10 years, because you're a 40-year-old woman. But if you're a 50-year-old man, your blood pressure's up a bit, you smoke, then your risk will be higher. And they're the patients we need to see.
Yeah. And they're probably the patients that are sticking their head in the sand.
Yes.
And not getting this. Yes.
And that's
why
we're
we're
here
here tonight.
tonight,
Exactly.
to try and raise
yes.
awareness.
Exactly. And that's why
And it's never
too
too late.
late.
You
Exactly.
can always make a difference.
Yeah. And Lisa, just coming to you there. So on that, in terms of that person in the community, maybe has heard this talk, maybe attended some of our own talks, the Croí talks in the community, came across some of our Croí Health team, has an idea that they need to make some changes, but is finding it very difficult. So what kind of tips might you have for somebody in terms of making something making a change and sustaining it. I know that's a very long, probably, process, but in a little potted version, is there anything you can?
Yeah, we conveniently do much longer sessions on this topic, so do keep an eye on the Croí website to find out if you'd like to find out more. And it is an in-depth thing, and I suppose the investment in prevention that's happening currently is such an incredibly important and positive thing. And I think another important and positive thing in health services these days as well is a kind of an awareness of the importance of behavioural science and health psychology in our services, and so bringing behaviour change and support for self-management into the picture as well. And so we'll see a lot more of this, which is really important. But to answer your question, Annie, I think there's 3 things that I'd really like to highlight. If you're looking to make some changes, finding it hard, which is the norm. It is hard, it feels hard because it is hard. But 3 really important things to start thinking about are, firstly, what are your goals when it comes to your health? What are your priorities? Secondly, what are the barriers to those goals? What make it difficult for you to do things differently in your day-to-day life? What make it difficult to be more physically active, to sleep better, to reduce sugar in your diet? Whatever it is that is the priority for you, what is currently making that more difficult? And then the third is, from your kind of awareness of what your goals are, what your priorities are for your health, your awareness of what the barriers are, where can you support yourself? That's the third thing. So by getting a sense of what your barriers are, what is making it more difficult in your day-to-day life, to make changes, to do the things that you want to be doing for your health, your awareness of those and of the things that are making it harder to get to them, that is where you have opportunities to support yourself. I suppose I have kind of a sense that because we have so much knowledge of the things that we should be doing, the things that are good for us, and we can feel quite informed, we can even feel quite motivated, that, you know, once that switch is flipped, that's it, and change should be easy, and long-term change should be easy. But again, as we all know, that's not the case. So really, change is much more of a journey, and rather than starting a big kind of new exercise plan tomorrow.
Starting on Monday.
Yeah, exactly. What is really effective is to see your kind of progress towards a health goal as a journey, as a process. So rather than like flipping a switch, what you're trying to do is give yourself opportunities to practice the thing that you want to be doing more of, opportunities to have experience with the thing that you want to be doing more of, so that you can learn more about your exercise routine. You can get more confident with it, you can feel more motivated with it. We don't start with knowledge and motivation necessarily. We start with action, and then we develop knowledge, motivation and confidence over time, and these are the really critical ingredients to making changes and sustaining them, keeping them going. We often want to set ourselves really big health goals, and big, grand, shiny health goals are great, but what really gets us along the path in terms of making changes in our day-to-day life is achievable and realistic goals that we can start tomorrow and maintain the day after, and the day after, and the day after. So starting with a 20-minute walk 3 times a week on your lunch break is much more achievable and realistic than an hour-long walk 7 days a week in the evening, for example. So asking yourself, where can I start? Where am I starting from? And what can I do tomorrow, the next day, and the next day? 3 20-minute walks, just as a simple example, over the next month is an awful lot more steps than starting with a goal of that is beyond where you were starting from, that is not realistic, that is not achievable, because that will not allow you to accumulate experience and practice with the thing that you want to be doing. So what are your priorities? What are the barriers? Where can you support yourself?
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. And as you're talking, I was just thinking, listening to our health team here all the time, and you as a member of that, I know it's like this incremental change, and I know they talk about it in terms of just saving a little bit every week in the bank, in terms of looking at it as something building up in the bank over time, and eventually, I suppose, sustaining that and getting to your goal in the end. Frankie, just very quickly, because I want to move on to a different topic in a second, and time is rolling on here and racing away from us. From your perspective, and I know you have had maybe slightly more motivation than most, given the traumatic event that you had, but have you found it easy to make changes now and can sustain those changes in terms of lifestyle?
Lifestyle changes, let me see. I bought a new bike there 4 or 6 weeks ago, and I have to get out on it every day because I love it so much. So I invested a lot of money in it, mind you, but it's really aerodynamic, and it's got a Dura-Ace group set on it.
I'm impressed. Right.
So I've been at that every day practically, and I've lost about 4 or 5 kilos in the last 2 months. So nice. I'm happy with that sort of thing. I did find it hard to lose weight as an elderly person. It seems that like you have a hereditary disposition to being the same look as your mother and father, you know. And
back to those old genetics again, are we?
Yeah. You know, so it is difficult. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not. Because of a spinal problem, I'm not great at walking. Otherwise, I'd be doing that every day, you know. But like I do gym as well, and luckily my son has taken an interest in me showing him the routines in gym.
Yeah. And actually, on that, you know, I mean, we had Heartfest here today. We had members of the community in visiting with our health team, but we also had community clubs and groups here who were promoting activities that are not about, you know, cycling or going to the gym necessarily. There are other ways and other activities that you can participate in. We had a bowls club here, we had a gardening club, you know, other things that you can do that can keep you active and that contribute to your activity, physical activity minutes per week. Yeah?
Yeah, well, certainly doing something, anything is better than
Yeah,
nothing.
absolutely.
Sorry.
You're okay.
It's given out to here.
That's
Anything
good.
is better than nothing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And doing stuff as a community or in a group is very good for your mental well-being.
Yeah, and that brings us nicely on to our next area that I just wanted to cover was around stress and heart health. Sorry, Frankie.
Give you something before we go to that?
Yes, of
there
course.
There was one of the I didn't know that took me, I'd forgotten about, and I think it's important for everybody.
Oh,
and
very
it requires,
good.
it requires me taking this little instrument here, and it goes, I didn't know that negative emotions are risk factors for heart attack. Laughter is good for the heart. It increases blood flow by up to 20%. So remember, nurses and the lot, when you come across a cardiac patient, just start laughing and the blood flow will go up by 20%. When you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. When you're laughing,
everybody,
when you're laughing, the sun comes shining through. But when you're sighing, you bring on the rain, so stop your crying. Be happy again, no, keep on smiling. 'Cause when you're smiling, the whole world, it smiles with you.
Thank you, Frankie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Susan, laughter, heart health, 20% blood flow. Is that what he said?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that fact, but I'll defer to Frankie's judgment. So there was this massive study done called Intraspire worldwide. It took a huge amount of people and tried to determine why they were having heart attacks. And it was all the usual stuff that I'd spoken about, but one thing that came out clearly was psychosocial factors, or I suppose, around mental health. Acute stress can cause a heart attack. So if you have a fight with somebody, a terrible fight, you see in movies, somebody starts clutching their chest. Chronic stress, we didn't used to think caused heart attacks, but there's evidence now that it does increase inflammation. And then when you're chronically stressed, you're not going to lead a healthy lifestyle easily. And you tend to, COVID pandemic is an excellent example. I think we were all quite fraught during COVID and anxious. And we all turned to food and whatnot to cope with it. So if your mental health is good, you're more likely to be leading those healthy lifestyle changes. And it becomes a vicious circle as well, because when you're not feeling mentally well, it's harder to do it. So you do need to find a sensible way of managing your stress. I say that. I don't know if I've cracked it myself.
I think you're not alone there.
It's not easy. It's my children that stress me out the most. So if anybody has an answer for that, I'd be very grateful. Answers in an envelope, please.
Yes, yeah. And in terms of that, and we'll come to Lisa in a minute on this, but just in terms of stress and people being stressed out, and you talked about maybe, indulging in things, and just something we didn't mention, alcohol, friend or foe?
Foe.
Stress, yeah.
I mean, we'd all love to think alcohol is protective.
A glass of red wine.
Yeah.
You're going to tell us that's not good for us?
No, I'm not going to tell you that, because that would just put us all in a bad mood. The Mediterranean diet there's no doubt the Mediterranean diet is protective against cancer, heart disease, stroke, dementia, diabetes. And the Mediterranean diet does include a small amount of alcohol. But if you think of these people in think of the Mediterranean island.
Sardinia.
Yeah, in the 1950s. They weren't sitting there with their big balloon glass of wine. They would have a very small glass, and they would have dinner as a family. They'd all eat together and converse, from granny to child. So it's something about that communal element, and the little bit of alcohol with the meal, I think, is fine. And obviously sticking to your units, and the units unfortunately aren't very much. So 14 units for both men and women, and that's unfortunately a bottle and a half wine. It's not a terribly huge amount. And you can rock that up pretty quickly, particularly those big glasses you see in pubs now. That can be 250 mils, which is a third of a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Lisa, emotional health, heart health.
So I think Susan captured it really nicely in the additional challenges that stress can bring when it comes to living a healthy lifestyle. So a really important one to consider, and I suppose it's something that we often normalise. How do we know if we're stressed? How do we know if stress is an issue in our lives? So I think that's the only thing maybe to just spend a moment on that. One way to think about stress is it's like blood pressure. We all have blood pressure, but when it gets too high, it's time to do something about it. Same with stress. When it gets too high, it's time to do something about it. There is nothing wrong with needing to look at stress in your life. It's about it's a very personal, individual thing. It's going to be different for everyone what your threshold of stress is. But if it's starting to get in the way of you doing the things that you want to do in your day-to-day life, then it might be worth looking at. And there's a lot of things that you can do to understand stress more in your life and your responses to stress. You are so welcome to contact Croí to find out about ways that we can provide support. The HSE stress control program, stresscontrol.ie, is an excellent resource. If you're already living with a long-term condition, the Living Well program is another free HSE service, and all of these things can really add to your understanding of your emotional well-being, and then play that really important role in your ability to manage your physical well-being, because they're all connected together.
And then obviously the people like Frankie, or people who've had an event, or maybe at very high risk of having an event, that's a whole other level of stress, I guess.
Yeah. So when people after heart attacks come to the rehabilitation program or the prevention program they do afterwards, 1/3 of them, which is a lot, are clinically anxious. So it's a very normal reaction after a heart attack to be anxious. And if you've had a cardiac arrest, it's nearly inevitable you're going to be anxious. Now, normally the cardiac rehabilitation program brings down that anxiety as patients see it's possible to live a normal life afterwards. They have the support of the group and so on. But a small proportion of patients, their anxiety will not come down with the program. You can sort of pick them out at the start. There's red flags around their anxiety, and I think they need psychologists. Psychologists are integral parts of our health teams. As you can hear Lisa tonight, she speaks in a different way to me. It's a different skill. It's a very important skill, and they do a huge amount of work in helping people who are particularly challenged with anxiety and depression to manage that in a more proactive fashion. But it's not easy.
No. Yeah.
But help is there.
Help is there. I suppose that's what I was going to say. Help is there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not just the person, and we say this so often, it is just not just the person who has had the event either, especially when it's something like this. We spoke about Frankie's Anita, who's here this evening.
So
you know,
often the
like
partner who's witnessed it is actually more anxious. It is greater because, as Frankie said, he woke up and said, did I pass out? So he was absent for a lot of that. Whereas Anita, I don't want to speak for you, but you were there the whole time, and it must have been incredibly traumatic. And certainly when we see patients after an event in our program, we have such a strong emphasis, including the partner or
I was
a
just going to
relative.
ask you that.
Yeah, we bring them as well. And we ask, how are you doing? You know? And the psychologist is there for both.
Yeah. Frankie, do you have anything to add to that or to say on that?
None of that.
No? Okay.
You will now, if it happens again, but it's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have any of that at the time.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you cope?
With great difficulty, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. It was very trying for a long time because you're slow to come back to fitness, and also my stents occluded. You know, the first time, so I had to. I was 95% blocked again. You know. Again. Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah.
For the people who are listening or may not understand what that is.
So the stent is like a metal mesh, the inside of a big pen, and it's put into the artery, and it's expanded into the wall of the artery. So it's like scaffolding to keep the artery open. But plaque can recur within the stent, so it's not a cure. And for various reasons, the plaque can come back. And Frankie, you alluded to having a genetically high cholesterol, which was I don't know your history, but that's possibly one of the reasons it came back. And that's why we have to get people who've had an event, get them quickly, within 2 weeks, get them into a program where we tackle all of that. We nail the cholesterol, we nail the blood pressure, we help support them change their lifestyle, and we help them manage their psychological health. And I think, Frankie, now, if you give me 6 months, I think what we're going to have here, certainly in the West, is humdinger. And we already have a very good cardiac rehabilitation program, but it's just there's not enough resource, but there will be.
Yeah. An occlusion.
Occlusion? Oh no, humdinging. What Susan said, was it? Yes.
Humdinging.
Humdinging service. Is that it? Is that what you're saying, Susan? Yes.
An excellent service.
An excellent service. An excellent service.
I don't know where I got the expression from, but yeah.
And just on the cholesterol piece, very quickly, you mentioned a genetic condition. So there is a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, and I know that's maybe something different, but
so as I said, most of us our cholesterol's run around 5, but 1 in 250 of us will have a genetic mutation where you run a very high cholesterol, and the reason it's so high is your liver isn't clearing it. And you can do all the diet in the world you want, but your cholesterol will still be sky high. We're talking about 7, 8, 9, 10. It's high from birth because it's a genetic condition, so those patients present in their 30s, 40s, so they're young. and their disease tends to be more aggressive. They've more plaque when they present, and statins on their own is not enough because you need to get that sky-high cholesterol right down. But we have drugs now. All we had for years were statins, but now we've got 4, 5 different cholesterol-lowering drugs. So I say to my patients, the future is so bright here. We can now control your cholesterol. We couldn't do that
before, But for the general person whose cholesterol is kind of high, they can certainly bring that under control through lifestyle change.
Yes and no. You can lower it by about 10-15%, and if you take medical, I like the stanol steroid esters, they lower it by about 10%. The question is not should you take drugs. The question is not what your cholesterol is. The question is what is your risk.
Okay.
So,
and that's why it's so important to know your numbers.
Know your numbers, but get your risk calculated. And the obvious example is a 55-year-old man who smokes. He may have a normal cholesterol or an average cholesterol, but his risk is high because he's a 55-year-old man who smokes, and he will still benefit from a statin. Whereas you'll have a 65-year-old woman who's got a very high cholesterol, no other risk factors, but she's got very high levels of a good cholesterol. What's her risk? It's very low. So half my mother's bridge club women are on statins, and they don't need them.
Okay.
Because they're as healthy as trouts.
Okay.
Do you know?
Okay.
And then their husbands in the bridge club aren't on the statins.
Okay. And why are they on statins then?
Because the women look after themselves. So the question, you need to know your numbers, but it's not just about knowing your numbers, it's knowing your risk. And you can go online and calculate your risk. There's tools available online, or you could discuss it with your general practitioner.
Yeah, thank you. So Frankie, we'll just come back to you very quickly. We were talking about how you were coping with the whole emotional aspect of the event and everything, and you started a campaign?
Yeah, well, that was I kind of spoke about that earlier on, about the counter-attack campaign involving musicians, and again, my whole trust in that was to put up the question. I didn't know that, because through doing that, you've got all these things to look into. Like, I can just read off a few of them for people's benefit.
Your I didn't knows. Your I did not know.
Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, like simple ones like losing my husband suddenly would be so painful. I didn't know my daddy could die suddenly and I wouldn't get to say goodbye. Very important one. I didn't know that many people who die of heart attacks could have been saved. I didn't know that heart attack symptoms can be different in women and men. I didn't know that your heart is in the center of your chest and not on the left. I didn't know that a woman's heart is smaller and beats faster than a man's. Correct?
Susan, any comment?
These are all verified by consultants and doctors, okay? They're not things that I thought of.
You didn't make them up.
I'm just going to nod and agree.
I didn't know that a heart attack is not usually like you see in the movie with somebody falling dramatically to the floor. I didn't know that some heart symptoms don't happen in your chest. If you're not sure what's wrong, get it checked out. I didn't know that you can have a heart attack while resting. I didn't know that arm pain on your left side could be from a heart attack. I didn't know that chest discomfort that feels like tightness, pressure, or pain that lasts more than a few minutes could be a heart attack. I didn't know that pain that spreads up into your throat or jaw from your chest could be your heart. I didn't know that if you suddenly get tired or winded doing something that you could normally do easily, it may be heart disease. Only a few more.
Well, maybe we won't read them all, because we're going to go one more, and then we're going to go to the audience. Just if anybody have a think there, if anybody has any questions. This gentleman first, I think. Oh no, okay, fine. Yeah, you go there. Yeah, we'll come over to you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the problem that people who suffer strokes, as I did, unfortunately, 8 years ago, and you can get out of it, or you can be like me and be left in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. And obviously that's one of the consequences of having a stroke. But there has to be a huge education program done among all members of society in the dangers of heart attacks and strokes. And I was grand, as I thought, and my good wife Mary reminded me a number of times, go to the doctor, get checked out. And I said, yeah, I will. And I felt grand. I felt grand until the morning when I got a stroke. And since then, the right-hand side of me has not functioned. And okay, I'm delighted that I'm able to enjoy life so much and that I wasn't disabled fully or wasn't put out of action fully. But there's a huge education program to be done in relation to all people who eat the wrong things, people who smoke the wrong things, all things are wrong to smoke, people who drink too much, and what the consequences are. I think that organisations such as yours, which is a brilliant organisation, can use people like me to go out and say, look at folks, if you get a stroke, you can be left this way. Fair enough, you can recover sometimes for people who have stents, but in terms of strokes, there's a high risk that you'll be left disabled for the rest of your life. And I think if people realise just the risk that we're taking, and it has to be spelled out in black and white to people, it would make a big difference. But people have to be told in black and white terms what's going to happen to them if they continue to lead the sort of lives that people are. And it's amazing really when you think of it, what's been demanded of us are easy things, to live a better lifestyle and to cut out the bad things that we do. They're not rocket science. We don't need something to be created. Yeah. It means we have to do it, but too often people can live along and forget about the consequences until they happen. Yeah. And when they happen, it's too late. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and that's why I think all organisations involved in heart care have got to get the message out in a very coordinated fashion as to what the consequences of you not complying with the rules of life are.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. And while we're focusing on heart disease in our conversations, actually the risk factors for stroke, it's what we call it is cardiovascular disease, and that takes in heart attack and stroke, and the risk factors are the exact same. Only slight difference is blood pressure is a bigger driver of stroke, whereas cholesterol is a bigger driver of heart attack. And then the other thing we have to look out for is atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat. That causes a quarter of all strokes, and the strokes tend to be particularly disabling. And if it's picked up beforehand, going on a blood thinner can avert a stroke. So just a simple pulse check when you're in with your GP, have palpitations, get them checked out.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and that's a very good point. While we are discussing heart attacks here tonight, by virtue of the fact we have Frankie with us, but stroke is just
and it's funny,
as important. Yeah.
When I talk to patients about risk of heart attack, it doesn't really bother them having a heart attack as much, but they always say to me, I don't want to have a stroke. You know, because the thought of being, and you have some disablement left in the stroke, but you're yes. What people are terrified of is being severely disabled or in a nursing home after a stroke.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you. We have this gentleman here. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, my question is, it used to be recommended, especially for men, that a small daily dose of aspirin was recommended, and then that stopped. So I'm just wondering what the current
yeah, that's a really good question. So up to about 10 years ago, we used to put people on aspirin if they had high risk of a heart attack. All their numbers added up to high risk. But then the data came out that aspirin reduced the risk of heart attack, but it was outweighed by the risk of serious bleeding, stomach bleeding usually. So whereas if somebody's already had a heart attack, the benefit of aspirin outweighs the risk. So now what we call primary prevention, if you haven't already had a heart attack, we don't advise aspirin. Now, there's other good things about aspirin, and there's emerging evidence for cancer prevention. So if I see somebody who's already on aspirin, I don't take them off it, but we have a chat about what it's doing for them. And it comes down to an individual decision at the end of the day.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, the gentleman down the back there.
Thanks. My dad actually back in France over 15, 16 months ago had a bit of a heart scare. He was actually perfectly fine. Was feeling, the only symptom he had was feeling a little bit tired that day. At about 10 o'clock at night, he was getting ready for bed and starting having a bit of a pain on his back. And thank God my mum was there and quickly realized that something was wrong. So he was actually at the hospital in the A&E, was just about 10 minutes drive from home. And he was seen straight away. And thank God, I mean, he ended up with 3 stents fitted. So no damage was done. He was seen, and thank God he was well looked after. My question is on a good bit of statins, 80 milligram. Could you tell me the side effects, long-term side effects of statins, please?
There's none.
None at all.
No. So we have 25 years of data now on statins, and there's no serious long-term side effects. And in fact, what's really clear now is the vast majority of side effects that are reported on statins are due to the nocebo effect. So the placebo effect is when you take a dummy drug, and it's the virtue of taking the drug makes you feel better.
Sure.
The nocebo effect is you take a drug that you think will make you feel worse, and it does. And the people responsible for this nocebo effect are the Daily Mail and other newspapers and the internet. And the studies have clearly shown its nocebo effect. And when I was in Imperial College, we ran a trial called Samson, and we gave patients 3 boxes. 1 month they would take 1 box and it would have a statin in it. The next month they'd take another box and it had a non-statin placebo. And then another month they took nothing. And we asked them to rate their symptoms each month. And what we showed was in the months they were on the dummy drug, they had the exact same symptoms as the months they were on statin.
Okay.
But they felt terrible and they were convinced it was their statin. But we were able to show them, actually, it's not your statin. It's not their fault. The mind is a very powerful thing, as Lisa will tell you. They were having genuine symptoms. So we have got to stop warning patients you'll get muscle side effects in this drug. I never do that. I say to patients, don't read
Everything
put it in the bin. And I always say to them, if you get side effects, I'll eat my hat. You know, and think of the benefit. The benefit of it far outweighs anything you could possibly do to you. So tell your dad to stay on the 80 and don't stop it.
Time for one final question, if anybody has anything that they really want to ask. One gentleman here, yes, thank you. We're coming around to that, can I just ask, does everybody who has a stent go on a statin?
Yes.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what your cholesterol is.
What your cholesterol is.
No.
And there's a term we're going to be hearing a lot more of, ASCVD?
Yes, which is cardiovascular disease due to plaque.
Due to
So
plaque.
that's ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease.
Perfect.
I'm curious, there was a discussion of stress, and there's emotional stress and mental and other physical stress, but I'm curious about, because I've lived in really noisy areas, industrial areas in the past, I'm curious about the environmental stress that a person goes through and the impact on the heart and well-being from noise pollution, from whether it's airlines or trains or automobile traffic and motorcycles and unmuffled vehicles, and then also just the light pollution that's increasingly becoming worse. In particular, with the new lighting that we have, that the LED lights that really stab. They don't eliminate; they pierce. I mean, illuminate. They don't illuminate as much as they pierce the eyes. And I don't know if that's because the light is a digital light or a different type of light. But anyway, any comment on that, on the environmental stresses on the body?
Yeah, not on the lights now, because I wouldn't know enough about it. But certainly there is increasing interest in environmental effects and cardiovascular disease. And certainly if you live in a city, there's higher rates of heart disease compared with rural areas, and it's due to pollution. The noise issue is, yes, there is a risk there because it causes a chronic stress. Somebody who lives next to noisy neighbours or who lives next to a very noisy airline, that causes a degree of stress in their lives, and there is a link. But it's a tricky one. You know, that's your house and that's where you live. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So my timekeeping is absolutely abysmal this evening, so we're going to try and wrap up a little bit. I'm going to ask each one of our panel for a takeaway message, what they want you to leave here with this evening. And we might have one more little song from Frankie as well to sing us out. So before we do that, I also wanted to say again, so thank you very much to our supporters, Benecol, this evening, and they have provided some samples of Benecol just outside the door, so please feel free to pick up some of those as you leave. And again, thank you to everyone who has made today possible. My colleagues here in Croí, the Croí Health team, across our organisation. It's just been a supreme team effort to get today across the line. So thank you so much to everybody. And as we close out on Heartfest 2022, used to 23, we'll see about that. So Susan, we'll start with you. A final take-home message that you would like the audience and our audience watching this evening to take away with them.
If you're worried, come and see somebody, and it's better knowing and then being able to do something about it than not knowing and then ending up in coronary care with something that was probably mostly preventable. So seek help. You'll be welcomed, you'll be treated, and lots of room for optimism.
Absolutely. And just on that, HeartLink West, Croí's free nurse helpline, 091 544 310. Feel free to pick up the call, pick up the phone and give Maeve a call, and she'll be able to guide you as well if you don't manage to get to your GP. Lisa.
There is so much power in knowing, but the step to getting to doing, regardless of how strong the case is still a tricky one. So make contact with us, have a look at the website, contact HeartLink West, and find out about getting from knowing to doing. The strongest predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. So undoing routines, setting up new routines, there are a lot of challenges and barriers to doing that, and giving ourselves a hard time for that isn't going to help. That's going to make it harder. So seek ways to support yourself when there is barriers to making changes, whether it's stress or things in your environment. There are a lot of things that make change tricky, but because there is so much to be gained from making changes, from taking steps in our lifestyle towards our health goals, do keep in mind the importance of supporting yourself, doing your cardiac rehab, tackling stress in your life, whatever it is for you, join a club, whatever it is. It's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, Lisa. Frankie, any final word from you before you sing us out?
Go and find out the information that's there. That's really what it's about, and keep on smiling. But most importantly, go and find out for yourself the information. Go and ask the questions. It's all there, and all the answers are there. And as we've heard, most of the time it's preventable. Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to do another song, but I'm going to do one anyway.
Oh my goodness. As he's getting set up there, I'd just like to say as well that as you're driving home this evening, and anybody that's watching us out and about in Connemara, County Galway, County Mayo, keep an eye out for some of the landmark locations that might be lit up red this evening for World Heart Day as part of the global campaign. If you're driving down by the Claddagh, keep an eye out for the Galway Hooker, which is lit up red and has the Croí logo on it this evening, and there's a stunning photograph in one of the papers today on that, and we're very, very grateful to everybody who has participated in that Shine a Light campaign with us this year. So thank you everyone, thank you for watching, thank you for coming. Frankie, over to you.
Okay. When I left walking wounded. I made my escape in the rain. Just a prisoner of hurt, I had much worth the work, freeing my mind of the pain. I spent hours of sitting alone in the dark, listening to love songs and falling apart. Lord, I know I made crying an art, weeping the slow healing heart, the slow healing heart is dying to mend, is longing for love, is lonely again. And when the spirit is broken and the memories start and nothing moves slower than a slow healing heart. Well, I prayed for blind faith to lead me to places where I'm not afraid. And I'm doing fine both in body and mind, but some hurts take longer to fade. There's a part of my feelings forever on guard against looks that are tender and words that are harsh. Lord, I know I made crying an art, weeping a slow healing heart, the slow healing heart is dying to mend, is longing for love, is lonely again. And when the spirit is broken and the memories start and nothing moves slower than a slow healing heart. Oh, nothing moves slower than a slow healing heart. Thank you.